Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be completely conscious but unable to move, speak, or even blink, while everyone around you believes you're dead? Well, let me tell you something that will shake you to your very core, because what happened to me is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Yet here I am, alive, breathing, and ready to share every single terrifying detail of the day I was almost buried alive. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you understand that every single word I'm about to tell you is real, raw, and absolutely true. This isn't some horror movie plot or a nightmare I had after eating too much pizza before bed. This is my life, my experience, my trauma, and my miracle all wrapped into one impossible story that still haunts me every single day. I need you to lean in close, turn up the volume, and prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about life, death, and that thin, almost invisible line that separates the two. I was 28 years old when this happened, living what I thought was a perfectly ordinary life in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep and gossip traveled faster than wildfire through the close-knit community that had been my entire world since birth. I had a decent job at a local insurance company, a loving family that consisted of my mother, father, and younger sister Emily, and a circle of friends I'd known since childhood, people who had been there for every milestone, every celebration, every moment of joy and sorrow throughout my life. My days were predictable, comfortable, safe, or at least that's what I believed, until everything changed in the span of 72 hours that would alter my existence forever and make me question everything I thought I knew about reality. It started on a Tuesday morning. I remember it so clearly because Tuesdays were always my favorite days at work. Less stressful than Mondays when everyone was still recovering from the weekend. Not as chaotic as Wednesdays when the week really picked up momentum. Just right in that sweet spot where everything flows smoothly and the rhythm of work feels almost meditative in its predictability. I woke up feeling slightly off, nothing major, just a weird heaviness in my limbs that I attributed to maybe sleeping in an awkward position, or perhaps needing more water. You know those mornings when your body just feels a little sluggish but you don't think much of it, because we all have those days. I pushed through my morning routine, brushed my teeth while staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing that I looked a bit paler than usual but thinking nothing of it, because who doesn't look a little washed out under fluorescent lighting at 6 in the morning when the sun hasn't even fully risen yet? I made my usual breakfast, 2 scrambled eggs with toast and black coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. Ironic now that I think about it, how that phrase would take on such a dark and literal meaning in just a few short days. The heaviness in my body persisted throughout the morning, creeping into my chest like an unwelcome visitor who refuses to leave, settling into my lungs with an uncomfortable presence that made me breathe just a little more consciously than normal. By lunchtime, I felt like I was moving through thick molasses, every step requiring more effort than it should, every breath feeling slightly more laborious than the one before, and my colleagues were starting to notice that something wasn't quite right with me. My colleague Sarah noticed and asked if I was okay, her brown eyes filled with genuine concern, the kind of worry that only comes from someone who really cares about your well-being. But I waved her off with a smile and a joke about needing a vacation, because I didn't want to be dramatic, didn't want to be that person who complains about every little ache and pain. So I powered through, convinced that whatever this was would pass by the end of the day, like so many other minor ailments I'd experienced throughout my life. But it didn't pass. Instead, it got worse. Progressively and terrifyingly worse with each hour that ticked by without mercy or explanation. By 3 in the afternoon, I was struggling to keep my eyes open. My head felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, threatening to pull me down into unconsciousness with every passing moment. And there was this strange tingling sensation spreading from my fingertips up through my arms like electricity running under my skin, but without the pain. Just a weird and concerning feeling I'd never experienced before in my entire life. I tried to type an email, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate properly, hitting the wrong keys, moving sluggishly like they belonged to someone else, and the frustration was starting to mix with a growing fear that something was genuinely wrong with me, something beyond just a simple virus or fatigue. The room started to spin gently, just enough to make me grip the edge of my desk for stability, my knuckles turning white from the pressure as I tried to ground myself in reality. And I remember thinking that maybe I should go home, that maybe this was more serious than I wanted to admit. But even then, even with all these alarming symptoms piling up, part of me was still minimizing, still telling myself it was probably just a bug, just exhaustion, just something that would go away with a bit of rest. I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave early. She took one look at my face and immediately agreed, even offering to drive me home herself because apparently I looked worse than I felt. But I declined because I didn't want to inconvenience anyone, didn't want to make a fuss, didn't want to admit that I was actually scared of what was happening to my body, scared of losing control, scared of the unknown that was rapidly approaching whether I acknowledged it or not. The drive home is a blur now. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Remember focusing intensely on the road, because my vision kept trying to blur at the edges like someone was slowly turning down the brightness and clarity of the world around me. Remember pulling into my driveway and feeling an overwhelming sense of relief that I'd made it without incident, without crashing, still in control even though that control was slipping through my fingers like fine sand. I stumbled into my house, dropped my bag by the door where it landed with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the empty rooms, and collapsed onto my couch, telling myself I just needed to rest for a bit, just needed to close my eyes for 20 minutes and everything would be fine. Everything would return to normal. My body just needed a moment to recover from whatever was happening to it. I texted my mom that I wasn't feeling great but nothing to worry about, adding a smiley face emoji so she wouldn't panic, because that's what you do when you don't want to alarm the people who love you. You minimize, you downplay, you pretend everything is under control, even when you can feel control slipping through your fingers like water, even when deep down you know something is seriously wrong. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have because the next thing I knew, it was dark outside and someone was pounding on my front door with an urgency that penetrated the fog in my brain, cutting through the haze of whatever was happening to me with sharp, insistent rhythm. The pounding felt distant, muffled like I was underwater and the sound was coming from the surface above me, and I tried to get up, tried to call out that I was coming, but my body wouldn't respond, not even a little bit, not even a twitch or the smallest movement. Panic started to bloom in my chest, cold and sharp like shards of ice piercing through my ribcage because I could hear everything perfectly, could think clearly, could feel every sensation, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything to signal that I was conscious and aware and absolutely terrified of what was happening to me. The pounding continued, and then I heard a key in the lock, my mother's voice calling my name with increasing urgency, a tone I recognized immediately as maternal fear, that instinct mothers have when they know something is terribly wrong with their children, and then footsteps rushing toward me, the sound of her shoes against the hardwood floor echoing in my ears like thunder. I felt hands on my shoulders shaking me gently at first and then more frantically, heard my mother screaming my name over and over, her voice rising in pitch with each repetition, felt her checking my pulse, her fingers cold against my neck as she searched desperately for signs of life that she couldn't seem to find. I wanted to scream that I was okay, that I was right there, that I could hear her, but nothing worked. My body had become a prison, and I was locked inside with no way to communicate with the outside world, no way to let them know I was still here, still conscious, still desperately alive. I heard her on the phone, voice trembling and broken, telling someone that her daughter wasn't breathing, wasn't responding, that she needed an ambulance immediately, and her panic was feeding mine because if she couldn't feel my breathing, if she couldn't find my pulse, then how weak were my vital signs? How close was I to crossing that line between life and death? How long did I have before this became permanent and irreversible? But I was breathing. I could feel air moving in and out of my lungs, slow and shallow, but definitely there. Why couldn't she feel it? Why couldn't she tell that I was alive, that I was just trapped and needed someone to help me break free from this prison my own body had become? The next minutes, or maybe it was hours, time had lost all meaning for me in this state of conscious paralysis, were a chaotic swirl of sirens, voices, hands touching me, lifting me, strapping me onto something hard and uncomfortable that I assumed was a stretcher. I heard paramedics talking in calm, professional tones, those tones they use when they're trying not to alarm family members, but that actually just make everything seem more terrifying because you know they're hiding the severity of the situation. And I heard them say words like unresponsive and no pulse and possible cardiac event, and I wanted to scream at them that they were wrong, that I was right there, that they needed to look harder, listen closer, not give up on me yet, but I was trapped. In silence, a prisoner in my own flesh screaming voicelessly in the darkness of my mind. The ambulance ride was torture, every bump and turn sending jolts through my immobile body, every siren wail a reminder that something was desperately wrong, every radio transmission between the paramedics and the hospital, another nail in the coffin of hope that someone would realize I wasn't dead, that I was just trapped, that I just needed someone to find a way to free me from this inexplicable paralysis that had seized control of my entire physical being. I could hear my mother crying in the background, could hear her talking to my father on the phone, could hear the devastation in her voice as she tried to explain what was happening, and my heart, my very much alive and beating heart, was breaking for her, for all of them, for the nightmare they were living while I lay there helpless and invisible, screaming silently in my mental prison, while the world around me treated me like I was already gone. At the hospital, everything became even more intense. More voices, more hands, bright lights that I couldn't see but could sense through my closed eyelids, sharp smells of antiseptic and medicine that filled my nose and made me want to cough but couldn't, and all the chaos and urgency only served to remind me that I was in serious trouble, that something was terribly wrong and nobody knew what it was or how to fix it. I heard doctors barking orders, heard the beeping of machines, heard someone say they were intubating me, and I felt the invasion of tubes and wires, felt the indignity of being handled like an object rather than a person, felt the absolute horror of being treated as a body without a mind or soul, as something that had already lost its human essence, even when that essence was screaming desperately to be acknowledged, to be recognized, to be saved from this nightmare. Time stretched and contracted in ways that made no sense, minutes feeling like hours feeling like seconds, and through it all I remained locked inside myself, screaming silently, praying desperately, hoping frantically that someone, anyone, would notice that I wasn't gone, that I was still fighting, still present, still desperately clinging to life even as everyone around me was preparing to let me go, to declare that the battle was over when they didn't even know I was still fighting, with every fiber of my being. Tests were run. I could hear the doctors discussing results, hear them talking about my brain activity or lack thereof, hear them using words like irreversible and brain death, and I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that their machines were lying, that I was right there listening to every single word they said, understanding everything, feeling everything, living every moment of this nightmare with a brutal clarity that made it all worse because I knew exactly what was happening but couldn't do anything to stop it. My family gathered around what I assume was my hospital bed. I could hear them crying, could hear my sister Emily's sobs, could hear my father's deep, broken voice as he tried to be strong for everyone, could hear my mother's whispered prayers, and every sound was a knife in my heart because I couldn't comfort them, couldn't tell them I was okay, couldn't reach out and hold their hands the way I desperately wanted to, and the helplessness of that situation was almost as painful as the physical. Paralysis itself. Hours passed, or maybe days. I lost all sense of time in that darkness, and then I heard a conversation that made my blood run cold, that filled me with a terror so complete and overwhelming that I thought it might actually kill me where all the other complications hadn't. The doctor was speaking in soft, measured tones the way people do when they're delivering the worst possible news, trying to be gentle but knowing there's no soft way to say what needs to be said. And he was telling my parents that there was no hope, that the machines were the only thing keeping my body functioning, that I was already gone, and it was time to let me go with dignity, to not prolong the inevitable, to accept that their daughter had passed, and all that remained was an empty body, sustained by technology. I heard my mother collapse, heard my father's anguished cry, heard Emily screaming no over and over again, and I was screaming too, inside my head, screaming that I was alive, that I was there, that they couldn't give up on me, but no one could hear me. No one knew that behind my still face and unresponsive body was a fully conscious mind, trapped and terrified and desperately fighting to be seen, to be recognized, to be saved from this horrible fate unfolding around me. The decision was made to take me off life support. I heard my parents agree through their tears, heard them say they didn't want me to suffer anymore, didn't want to keep me tied to machines when there was no hope of recovery, and I understood their decision even as it destroyed me, because from their perspective I was already gone. They were just letting my body catch up to what they believed my mind had already done, They were being merciful in the only way they knew how, even though that mercy meant my actual death when I was still very much alive. The machines were turned off, tubes were removed, and everyone waited for me to stop breathing to finally slip away into the death they all believed had already claimed me. But I didn't stop breathing. My lungs kept working on their own, slow and shallow but steady, and I could hear the confusion in the room, could hear the doctors saying it was just reflexes, just the body's final automatic functions before shutting down completely, that it wouldn't last long, that they should be patient and wait for nature to take its course. But it did last. Hours passed and I kept breathing, kept existing in this horrible limbo between life and death. And eventually they moved me out of the ICU, moved me to a quieter room where my family could sit with me during what they believed were my final hours, where they could say goodbye in private, where they could grieve without feeling watched by busy medical staff dealing with other patients who actually had a chance of survival. My mother never left my side. I could hear her talking to me, telling me stories from my childhood, reminiscing about happy times, telling me it was okay to let go, that she loved me and would see me again someday. And every word was beautiful and devastating because I wanted to answer her, wanted to tell her I loved her too, wanted to tell her not to give up on me because I was still fighting, still holding on, still clinging to hope that something would change before it was too late. Days passed. I think it was 3 days, but I couldn't be sure because time had become an abstract notion with no real meaning in the darkness of my mental prison, and my breathing continued. My heart continued to beat, but the doctors said it was just a matter of time, that my body was strong but eventually it would give out, that they'd seen cases like this before where the dying process took longer than expected, where the body stubbornly clung to life even when the brain had already gone. The word dying echoed in my mind like a funeral bell, because I wasn't dying, I was living, I was conscious, I was aware, but no one knew, no one could tell, and the isolation of that realization was almost worse than the physical paralysis, knowing I was completely alone in this, that nobody could help me because nobody knew I needed help, that everyone believed I was already gone when I was actually still here, screaming silently in the darkness. Then came the conversation I'd been dreading with every fiber of my being. My parents decided it was time to make funeral arrangements, time to prepare for the inevitable, and I heard them discussing caskets and burial plots and memorial services, and the reality of what was about to happen hit me with the force of a freight train, with a brutal clarity that left me breathless in my mental if not physical state. They were going to bury me alive, put me in a box and lower me into the ground while I was still conscious, still aware, still able to feel and think and experience every moment of suffocation and terror that would come when the dirt fell over my casket and I was left alone in the darkness underground, alive but buried, conscious but presumed dead, and there was no way to stop it, no way to make them know the truth, no way to escape the horrible fate that awaited me. The panic that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, worse than any nightmare, worse than any fear I'd ever known, because this was real, this was happening, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it except pray, except hope, except cling to the faint possibility that something, somehow, would change before they put me in the ground forever. My family made the arrangements quickly. They wanted to move forward before the grief became too overwhelming, before they lost their resolve to do what they thought needed to be done. And I heard them talking to a funeral director, a man with a smooth, professional voice that probably comforted many families, but only filled me with dread every time I heard him speak about the details of my impending burial. They chose a simple but elegant casket, picked out flowers, white lilies because they were my favorite, though I'd never imagined them being used at my own funeral, selected music that was supposed to be comforting and peaceful, and planned a service that was meant to celebrate my life while mourning my death. And every decision they made was done with love. I could hear it in their voices, could feel it in the way they agonized over every detail, wanting everything to be perfect, wanting to honor me in the best way possible, and that somehow made it all worse because I knew they were acting out of love, not malice. They genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, believed they were laying their daughter to rest with dignity and respect when they were actually sending me to the worst death imaginable. The viewing was scheduled for 2 days later, followed immediately by the burial, and those 2 days were an eternity of darkness and fear, each minute crawling by like an hour, each hour feeling like a day. And all the while I was trapped in my body, aware of every second passing, mentally counting down to my horrible fate, knowing exactly what awaited me and unable to do anything to prevent it. I was moved from the hospital to the funeral home. I could tell by the change in sounds, the absence of medical equipment, the different quality of the air, the new voices of people who worked with the dead rather than the living, and the symbolism of that transition wasn't lost on me. I was being transferred from the world of the living to the world of the dead, even though I still very much belonged to the former. I felt hands touching me again, but this time they weren't trying to heal me. They were preparing me, preparing my body for display, and the indignity of it, the violation of being handled by strangers who thought I was nothing more than an empty shell, was almost unbearable, made me want to scream and fight and push them away. But all I could do was lie there and endure it, endure every touch, every adjustment, every preparation for my final display. They dressed me in something soft. I think it was a dress my mother had chosen, something I'd worn to a wedding the previous summer, something that held happy memories that now felt tainted by the current circumstances. And they positioned my hands, folded across my chest in that traditional funeral pose, and even though I couldn't see myself, I could imagine how I looked, peaceful and serene, beautiful in death, when the reality was that I was screaming inside, terrified and desperate and anything but peaceful. The day of the viewing arrived. I could tell by the increase in activity, by the sounds of people arriving, by the soft music playing in the background, some instrumental piece that was probably supposed to be soothing, but only served to heighten my anxiety, to remind me that time was running out, that soon I'd be in the ground, and then it would truly be too late for anyone to notice the truth. I heard people walking past, heard them crying, heard them sharing memories and condolences, heard my aunt sobbing uncontrollably, heard my best friend from college give a speech about our friendship that was so beautiful and heartbreaking that I would have cried if I could, and every word, every tribute, every expression of love and loss was a reminder of everything I was losing, of all the life still left to live, if only someone could see the truth. My body was on display, lying in the casket, and people filed past to pay their respects, to say goodbye, to have one last look at me before I was gone forever. And I felt the air change as people approached, felt the subtle shifts in temperature as they leaned close, heard their whispered goodbyes and declarations of love, and I wanted so badly to move, to give any sign that I was there, that I could hear them, that I wasn't ready to leave yet, but my body remained motionless, betraying me at the moment I needed it most to respond. My family stood by the casket for hours, greeting visitors, accepting condolences, being strong for each other while falling apart inside, and I could hear every word, every sob, every broken sentence, and it was destroying me to know that I was causing them this pain, that if I could just move one finger, just flutter one eyelid, just do anything at all, I could end their suffering and my own, could stop this terrible machinery of death that had been set in motion based on a misdiagnosis. The viewing ended as the sun was setting. I could sense the change in light through my closed eyelids, and I heard the funeral director gently telling my family that it was time to close the casket, that they needed to say their final goodbyes before the burial in the morning. And this was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading with every part of my being. This was the moment when the world of the living would officially say goodbye to me and transfer me to the world of the dead. And I was screaming inside, screaming so loud that I felt like my mind might shatter from the effort of screaming without voice, without any way to make anyone hear me. My mother approached first. I could smell her perfume, that floral scent she'd worn my entire life, that fragrance that always meant safety and home and unconditional love, and she leaned close and kissed my forehead, her lips warm against my cold skin, and she whispered that she loved me, that she'd see me again someday, that I should go to the angels now and be at peace. And her words were so beautiful and so wrong because I wasn't going anywhere. I was still here. I was still with her if only she could realize it. My father came next, his goodbye brief because I knew he was trying not to break down completely, trying to be the strong rock for the family even as his world was crumbling, and I could hear the tremor in his voice, could feel his pain, and my heart was breaking for him because he'd always been my hero, and now he couldn't save me from this. Emily was last, my baby sister who wasn't such a baby anymore, and she held my hand, squeezed it tightly, and told me that I was her hero, that she'd try to be strong like I'd always been, that she'd carry me in her heart forever, and I felt her tears fall onto my skin, hot and wet, and I wanted to squeeze back so badly that my mind almost made me believe I could feel my fingers twitching. But I knew it was just wishful thinking, just my desperate brain trying to convince itself that it still had control over this traitorous body. Then I heard the sound that still haunts my nightmares, the slow final closing of the casket lid, the darkness becoming complete as the last sliver of light disappeared, and I was sealed in, trapped in a box, unable to see or move or call out, experiencing what I can only describe as the purest form of terror that exists, a fear so deep and primal it touched something primordial in my soul, something that knew being buried alive was one of the worst fates any human being could face. The casket was well made, padded, and comfortable, designed to be a peaceful final resting place, but for me it was a tomb, a prison, a hell that I was fully conscious in, and I could feel the walls around me, could sense the limited space, could understand that soon this box would be lowered into the ground and covered with dirt, and I would be buried alive, experiencing every moment of suffocation and terror until my body finally gave out or I went completely insane from the horror of it all. And I didn't know which would be worse, dying conscious or losing my mind before death finally came. The night passed with excruciating slowness, every second feeling like an hour, every minute an eternity, and I existed in that darkness with nothing but my thoughts and my fear and my desperate, futile hope that somehow something would change, that someone would notice, that some miracle would happen before morning came and they put me in the ground forever, sealing my fate in a way that would be impossible to undo. I tried everything I could think of to move, to make a sound, to do anything at all. I focused every ounce of mental energy I had on my fingers trying to will them to move even a millimeter. I tried to scream, tried to push sound up through my throat and past my lips. I tried to increase my breathing, to make my chest rise and fall more noticeably. But nothing worked. My body remained a prison, responsive only to the basic automatic functions of staying alive but refusing to obey any conscious command, refusing to cooperate with my desperate need to communicate with the outside world. I thought about my life, about all the things I'd never get to do, about the dreams I'd never fulfill, about the love I'd never experience, about the family I'd never have, and it wasn't fair, it wasn't right. I was only 28 years old with so much life left to live, so much potential unrealized, so many moments I'd never get to experience, and it was being taken from me not by death, but by the cruel twist of fate that had trapped me in this state where I was alive enough to suffer but not alive enough to prove it to anyone else, trapped in a horrible limbo between two worlds without truly belonging to either. I thought about what would happen after they buried me. How long would I last underground? Hours, days? Would I suffocate quickly, or would it be a slow, agonizing death? Would I lose my mind before my body gave out? Would I eventually welcome death as a release from the nightmare I was living? Or would I fight until the very end, conscious and aware and terrified right up until the moment my brain finally shut down from lack of oxygen and my soul was finally freed from this bodily prison? The thoughts spiraled darker and darker as the night wore on, and I found myself almost hoping that my body would give out before morning, that my heart would stop or my lungs would fail, because at least then I would truly be dead. I wouldn't have to experience being buried alive, wouldn't have to endure that final ultimate horror that awaited me with the rising sun. But my body kept going, kept breathing, kept my heart beating, kept me alive and conscious and trapped. And as I sensed dawn approaching through some inexplicable awareness of time passing, I knew that my nightmare was about to reach its terrible conclusion, that very soon I'd be underground in the darkness, alone, conscious, terrified, and no one would know. No one would come to save me. No one would hear me scream because my screams were trapped inside my head, invisible and inaudible to the outside world. Morning came. I could hear activity starting in the funeral home, could hear people arriving, could hear the funeral director making preparations, and then I felt movement, felt the casket being lifted, being carried, being loaded into what I assumed was a hearse, and the journey had begun. The journey to my grave. The journey to the end of my life, even though my life hadn't actually ended yet, even though I was still here, still conscious, still desperately clinging to hope that something, anything, would prevent this from happening. The drive to the cemetery was surreal. I could feel every turn, every bump in the road, could hear the muffled sounds of traffic outside, could sense the motion as we traveled to the place where I would be lowered into the earth, to the place that would become my final home, my eternal tomb, the place where I would spend my last conscious hours or days in terror and darkness before death finally claimed me for real. We arrived. The casket was carried again, and I could hear the sounds of a gathering, people talking in hushed tones, a priest or minister speaking words of comfort and faith, and I knew we were at the graveside, knew that beneath me was a hole in the ground, waiting to receive me, waiting to become my tomb for eternity, and the terror of that realization was almost physically painful, making my mind scream even as my body remained silent and still. The service was beautiful from what I could hear. The minister spoke about hope and resurrection and eternal life, about how death was not the end but a new beginning, about how those who die in faith will live forever in a better place. And under normal circumstances I might have found comfort in those words. But right now they were meaningless because I wasn't dead. I wasn't moving on to some peaceful afterlife. I was very much alive and about to be buried, and there was no comfort in that. No peace, no hope, only terror and desperation, and the knowledge that I had minutes, maybe only seconds, before my fate was sealed in a way that would be impossible to reverse. The minister finished speaking. I heard my mother sob as someone, probably my father, comforted her, heard Emily's quiet crying, heard friends and family saying their final goodbyes, and then the casket began to move, being lowered slowly into the ground, and I could feel the descent, could sense the walls of earth on either side of me, could imagine the darkness of the grave swallowing me up, consuming me, claiming me for the earth even though I wasn't ready to be claimed. The casket settled at the bottom of the grave with a soft thump, and I heard the sound I'd been dreading most of all, the sound of dirt hitting the top of the casket, that hollow thumping that signaled the beginning of the end, the start of the process that would seal me underground forever. And I realized with crystal clarity that this was it, that in a few minutes I would be completely buried, that the last shovelful of dirt would fall, and I would be alone in the darkness, underground, alive, and conscious and experiencing the most horrifying death imaginable, suffocating slowly as the earth pressed down on me and oxygen ran out, and nobody knew, nobody would come, nobody would rescue me because everyone believed I was already dead. The panic flooded through me with an intensity that dwarfed everything I'd felt before. A wave of terror so overwhelming I thought it might actually kill me, might stop my heart where all the other complications hadn't, and I tried one last time to move, to scream, to do anything at all, focusing every single particle of my being on making my body obey, on breaking through this paralysis, on giving some sign, any sign, that I was still here, still alive, still fighting desperately to survive. But then something happened that changed everything, something I never could have anticipated, something that literally saved my life in the most unexpected way possible, a twist of fate so improbable that even now, looking back, it seems almost too miraculous to be true, yet it happened and it saved me from the worst death imaginable. The sounds at the graveside began to fade as people started to leave, the burial crew working steadily to fill in the grave, and I could hear the rhythm of their shovels, the thud of dirt, the casual conversation between workers who did this every day and saw it as just another job, not realizing that this particular grave held someone who was still alive, someone who was still conscious, someone who was being buried while still breathing and thinking and feeling every terrible moment of what was being done to them. Most of the mourners had left, heading back to their cars, heading to my parents' house for the reception where they would share stories and comfort each other and celebrate my life while eating casseroles and drinking coffee. But I was here, alone except for the burial crew being covered with earth, feeling the weight of dirt accumulating above me, and I was losing hope, feeling my will to fight starting to crumble under the crushing weight of despair, feeling like maybe this really was the end, that maybe there was no escape, that maybe I would die here underground after all. Then I heard a voice, different from the burial crew, an older voice, weathered and kind, asking the workers if they could wait a moment before finishing, saying he needed to check something, that something didn't seem right, that he had a hunch he couldn't ignore even if it made him look foolish or crazy. One of the workers complained, saying they had another burial to get to, that they were already behind schedule, that they couldn't stop for some old man's feelings. But the older voice insisted, saying it would only take a minute, that he just had a feeling, that something was telling him he needed to check, that he couldn't just ignore this sensation even if it didn't make logical sense, even if everyone thought he was crazy. I heard footsteps approaching the grave, heard someone descending into the partially filled hole, and then I felt the most wonderful sensation I'd ever experienced. Someone touching the casket, not with the impersonal efficiency of a funeral worker, but with concern, with care, with intention, with the sense that something was wrong and needed to be investigated no matter what others thought or said. The voice belonged to Martin, the janitor at the funeral home, an elderly man who'd worked there for 30 years and who everyone said had a sixth sense about death, who could always tell when something wasn't quite right, when something was off, when something needed to be checked even if there was no obvious reason to do so. And he was standing in my grave, his weathered hands on my casket, and he was telling the burial crew that they needed to stop, that something was wrong, that this girl might not be dead, that they needed to check before continuing with the burial because he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen if they didn't. The workers laughed at him, told him he was crazy, that the girl had been examined by doctors, had been dead for days, that there was no way she was alive, that this was ridiculous, that he was wasting everyone's time. But Martin insisted, his voice growing stronger and more certain, saying he'd seen cases like this before many years ago, saying he recognized the signs, saying they needed to open the casket right now and check because he couldn't live with himself if he was right, and did. Nothing if he let a girl be buried alive because he was too afraid of looking foolish or causing trouble. The argument escalated, voices rising, the workers refusing to disturb a burial based on the gut feeling of an old janitor. But Martin didn't back down, and then I heard him say something that made everyone pause. He said he'd call the police if they didn't stop. He'd report them for burying someone alive, and he didn't care if it made him look foolish. He'd rather look foolish than have a girl's death on his conscience. He'd rather be ridiculed than allow something so horrible to happen if there was any chance he was right. The authority in his voice must have convinced them because I heard the shovels stop, heard urgent discussions, heard someone making a phone call, and then more people arrived, including the funeral director who was angry and embarrassed and insisting that this was unprecedented, that the family had already left, that they couldn't just exhume a body based on nothing more than a feeling, that this was inappropriate, that it would cause a scandal, that Martin was being ridiculous. But Martin stood his ground, this old janitor who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans, who most people probably never even noticed, who was invisible to many because his job was considered humble and unimportant. He stood his ground and demanded that they open my casket and check. And finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, I heard the sound of the casket lid being opened again, light flooding in through my closed eyelids, and voices exclaiming in shock and confusion. Voices saying it was impossible, that it couldn't be, that this made no sense, but clearly something was happening that didn't fit their understanding of what should be occurring. Someone checked for a pulse, found one, weak but steady. Someone put their hand in front of my nose and mouth, felt breath, faint but present, and suddenly there was chaos. Beautiful, wonderful chaos. People shouting for an ambulance, the funeral director on the phone frantically explaining the situation, Martin's voice saying thank God over and over, and me, still unable to move or speak, but feeling a surge of hope so powerful it almost hurt, so overwhelming I would have cried if I could, so intense that for a moment I thought my heart might burst from pure relief and gratitude. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and I was lifted out of the casket, out of the grave, back into the world of the living, and as they worked on me, I could hear someone calling my parents, could hear the person on the phone trying to explain the impossible, that their daughter who they'd just buried was actually alive, that there had been a terrible mistake, that they needed to come back to the cemetery immediately, that their daughter was waiting for them, that the miracle they'd been praying for had happened in the most improbable way. The paramedics were professionals, quick and efficient, checking my vitals, starting an IV, loading me back into an ambulance, and this time when we drove away, I wasn't heading toward death, but away from it, racing back to the hospital where hopefully someone could figure out what was wrong with me and how to fix it, how to free me from this bodily prison I'd been trapped in for days that had felt like an eternity. At the hospital, everything happened in a blur. Doctors and nurses swarming around me, running tests, hooking me up to machines, speaking in rapid medical terminology that I couldn't quite follow. And through it all, I remained trapped in my body, conscious of everything but unable to respond to anything. And I started to wonder if this would be my existence from now on. alive but locked in, aware but unable to communicate, and which was worse, being buried alive or living like this forever, trapped in my own mind with no way to interact with the outside world. Then my family arrived. I could hear them before I saw them, heard my mother's voice raised in a mixture of hope and disbelief, heard my father demanding to see me immediately, heard Emily crying, but this time with joy instead of grief. And when they entered the room where I was being examined, the emotions in their voices were so raw and powerful that I wished more than anything that I could open my eyes and see them, could tell them I was okay, could end the torture of not being able to communicate with the people I loved most in the world, of being so close to them yet so incredibly far away at the same time. The doctors worked for hours, running every test imaginable, consulting with specialists, researching rare conditions, trying to understand what had happened to me and how to reverse it, because by now they'd determined that I was indeed alive, that I had been alive the entire time, that somehow their initial examinations had missed the signs, had declared me dead when I was merely in some kind of extreme catatonic state that mimicked death so closely that even medical professionals had been fooled, had overlooked the subtle signs that indicated there was still life in this seemingly lifeless body. They brought in neurologists, specialists in rare disorders, even flew in an expert from a university hospital 3 states away who had experience with something called locked-in syndrome, a rare condition where a person is fully conscious but unable to move or communicate, except perhaps through eye movement. And finally, after what felt like days but was probably closer to 12 hours, they had a diagnosis and a treatment plan, an explanation of what had happened to me, and a hope that it could be reversed. I had contracted an extremely rare condition, something so unusual that most doctors never see a case in their entire career, a condition caused by a combination of a viral infection and an autoimmune response that had essentially shut down the voluntary muscle control in my body, while leaving me completely conscious and aware, trapped inside myself, but able to feel and think and experience everything around me. The good news was that it was treatable. The bad news was that the treatment would take time, possibly weeks or months, and there was no guarantee of full recovery, but it was hope, real tangible hope. And after everything I'd been through, hope was the most beautiful word in the entire English language. It was a lifeline I clung to with every fiber of my being. The treatment began immediately, a combination of medications, therapies, and time, and slowly, incredibly slowly, I started to regain control of my body. First, just tiny movements, a finger twitch that was definitely intentional, a flutter of my eyelids that made my mother cry with joy, and gradually over days and weeks, more and more control returning until finally, I could open my eyes and see the world again, could speak and tell my family how much I loved them, could move and hug, and cry and laugh and do all the things I'd taken for granted before this nightmare began, all the simple things we all do without thinking, but that are actually incredible miracles that should be appreciated every single day. The recovery process was long and difficult, physically exhausting and emotionally draining, because I had to process not just what had happened to my body, but what had happened to my mind during those days of being trapped and aware, had to work through the trauma of hearing my own funeral, of being placed in a casket, of being lowered into a grave, of coming within minutes of being buried alive, and that trauma wasn't something that could be overcome easily or quickly. It required time and therapy and support, and the willingness to face the most terrifying memories of my life over and over, until they lost some of their power over me. I had nightmares for months, would wake up screaming and clawing at the air, convinced I was back in the casket, back in the darkness, back in that suffocating prison of my own body, and I had to learn to sleep without panicking, had to learn to trust my body again, had to learn to believe that I was truly alive and safe and that this nightmare was over, that it wouldn't happen again, that I could relax and let go of the constant fear that had gripped me during those terrible days. My family struggled too, dealing with their own trauma of having grieved for me, having buried me, having said goodbye only to have me return to them like some kind of impossible miracle. And we went to therapy together, all of us working through the complex emotions of gratitude and guilt and fear and joy that came with my survival, working through the confusion of having lost someone and then getting them back, of having closed that chapter of their lives only to have it reopened in the most dramatic way possible, Martin the janitor became a hero, the man who trusted his instincts when everyone else dismissed them, the man who literally saved my life by refusing to let them finish burying me, by insisting something was wrong even when everyone thought he was crazy. And my family made sure he knew how grateful we were, how he would forever be part of our lives, how we could never repay him for what he'd done, but would spend the rest of our lives trying, honoring his bravery and his instinct and his refusal to give up even when others mocked him. He was humble about it, said he was just doing what felt right, that he'd seen something similar decades ago and couldn't shake the feeling that I might not be truly gone, that something was telling him he needed to check, that he needed to insist, that he needed to trust that instinct even when it seemed crazy to do so, and his simple act of paying attention, of trusting his gut, of standing up for what he believed even when others ridiculed him, that was what made the difference between me being here today telling this story or being bones in a grave dead before I ever really had a chance to fully live my life. The media got wind of the story eventually, and it became national news for a brief time. The girl who was almost buried alive, the janitor who saved her, the medical mystery that nearly cost a young woman her life. And while part of me hated the attention, another part understood that maybe my story could help someone else, could raise awareness about rare conditions, could remind people to trust their instincts and fight for what they believe is right, even when everyone tells them they're wrong, even when it seems easier to just go along and not cause trouble. I was interviewed by news outlets, talk shows, podcasts, everyone wanting to hear the story directly from me, wanting to know what it felt like to be trapped in my own body, to hear my own funeral, to come so close to being buried alive. And while it was difficult to relive those moments over and over, I hoped that by sharing my experience I might prevent something similar from happening to someone else, might encourage doctors to be more thorough, might give hope to families dealing with similar situations, might make people think twice before declaring someone dead, without examining every possibility. Months passed and gradually life started to return to something resembling normal, though I'll never be the same person I was before this happened. How could I be when I've experienced something so profound, so terrifying, so impossible that it's fundamentally changed the way I see the world and my place in it? I appreciate things differently now. The simple ability to move my fingers, to speak when I want to speak, to smile when I feel happy, things that everyone else takes for granted but that I know can be taken away in an instant without warning, without reason, without any way to predict or prevent it. I look at life through a different lens now, understanding in a way that most people never do just how fragile existence really is, how quickly everything can change, how important it is to tell the people you love that you love them, because you never know when you might lose the ability to say those words, when you might lose the opportunity to express how you feel, when you might find yourself trapped in silence wishing desperately you'd said more when you had the chance. I don't waste time on petty arguments anymore. Don't stress about small inconveniences. Don't take for granted the miracle of consciousness and mobility, and the ability to interact with the world around me, because I know what it's like to have all of that stripped away while still being aware enough to miss it desperately, to long for it with every fiber of your being, to beg for just one more moment of being able to move and speak and be part of the world, instead of just a silent observer. Trapped in darkness. My relationship with my family has deepened in ways I never could have imagined. We went through something together that most families never experience, a kind of shared trauma that could have broken us but instead made us stronger, more appreciative of each other, more willing to be vulnerable and honest about our feelings because we learned the hard way that time is precious and should never be wasted on pretending or hiding how we really feel, should never be taken for granted because it can end faster than any of us could imagine. My sister Emily and I are closer than ever. She tells me all the time that she's grateful I came back, that losing me and then getting me back was the most emotionally intense experience of her life, that she sees me with new eyes after all of this, that she appreciates our relationship in ways she never did before, and I tell her that I'm sorry I put her through that, but also grateful that it taught us both to value every moment we have together, to not assume we'll always be there for each other because life is uncertain and fragile and can change in an instant. My parents, who aged years in those few days they thought I was dead, who had to plan their daughter's funeral and say goodbye to their child, they look at me sometimes with such intensity and gratitude that it almost hurts, and I know they'll never take me for granted again. will never let a day pass without telling me they love me. And I do the same for them because I heard their grief, heard their pain, heard what my death did to them, and I never want to cause them that kind of suffering. Again, never want them to experience that agony of losing a child, even if only temporarily. Martin remains a fixture in our lives. We invited him to family dinners, celebrated holidays with him, included him in birthdays and special occasions, because he gave me back my life, and that makes him family in the truest sense of the word, not by blood, but by bond, by the connection formed when one person saves another from a fate worse than death, when someone refuses to look away when everyone else is doing so, when someone trusts their instinct even when the whole world tells them they're wrong. He's getting older now, moving a bit slower, his hair completely white now, his back a little more stooped, but his eyes are still sharp and kind, still have that spark that saved my life, and he still works at the funeral home because he says he has a calling, a duty to make sure that no one else goes through what I went through, that no one else gets buried alive on his watch, that he'll use his experience with my case to protect others, to watch for the signs others might miss, and I admire him for that dedication, for turning his own experience with my case into a mission to protect others, for not just moving on but using what he learned to make the world a better and safer place. I've become an advocate in my own way, working with medical organizations to raise awareness about rare conditions like mine, speaking at conferences about the importance of thorough examinations before declaring someone dead, pushing for better protocols and safeguards to prevent cases like mine from happening in the future. Because if I can save even one person from experiencing what I experienced, then all the pain and fear and suffering will have meant something beyond just my personal nightmare. It's not easy work, reliving my trauma over and over for the sake of education, telling my story to strangers who can't truly understand what I went through unless they've experienced it themselves. But I believe it's important. I believe that if I can prevent another family from going through what my family went through, if I can save another person from being buried alive, then it will be worth every difficult moment, every returning nightmare, every moment of panic when the memories become too vivid. I've also become a voice for listening to people like Martin, the janitors and maintenance workers and support staff, who often see things that others miss because they're paying attention in ways that professionals sometimes don't, who have the time and the care to notice small details that might seem insignificant but can actually be the difference between life and death, between saving someone and losing someone unnecessarily. And I encourage medical facilities and funeral homes to value and listen to all their employees, not just the ones with degrees and titles, because wisdom and intuition don't always come with advanced degrees. Sometimes they come with years of experience and careful attention, and a willingness to trust your instincts, even when others mock you. And those qualities shouldn't be dismissed just because they come from someone whose job is considered humble or unimportant by society. Sometimes I still have moments of panic, claustrophobic episodes where I feel like I'm back in the casket, back in the darkness, back in the grave, and I have to remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm alive, that I escaped that fate, and I'm here now in the light and the air and the world of the living, that I'm surrounded by people who love me, and who will never let something like that happen to me again. Those moments are becoming less frequent as time passes. The therapy is helping. The support of my family is helping. The knowledge that I survived something most people couldn't imagine is helping. But I don't know if they'll ever completely go away. Don't know if I'll ever be able to be in small dark spaces without my heart racing and my breath catching and my mind screaming that I'm trapped again, that the nightmare is coming back, that I need to escape before it's too late. But that's okay. I've learned to live with my scars, both the physical ones from the medical procedures and the psychological ones from the trauma, and I wear them as badges of survival, reminders that I'm stronger than I ever knew I could be, that I fought even when I had no way to fight, that I held on to hope even when hope seemed impossible, that I survived the unsurvivable and lived to tell the tale, to share my experience, to maybe make a difference in someone else's life who might be going through something similar. My story has a happy ending, or as happy as it can be given what I went through. I'm alive, I'm healthy, I'm surrounded by people who love me, and I have a second chance at life that I'm determined not to waste. Every day is a gift now, every breath a blessing, every moment an opportunity to experience something beautiful or meaningful or joyful. And I'm grateful in a way that's hard to put into words because gratitude seems like too small a word for the enormous appreciation I feel for simply being alive, for being able to move and speak and hug my family and see the sun and feel the breeze and do all the ordinary things everyone does without thinking, but that are actually extraordinary miracles when you stop to think about them. So let me ask you something. Have you ever stopped to think about how precious your life is? How miraculous it is that you can move and speak and interact with the world around you? How amazing it is that you're conscious and aware and able to experience this moment right now? Because I'm here to tell you that those things are gifts, incredible gifts that can be taken away faster than you can imagine, faster than you think possible, and you should never, ever take them for granted. Never assume. They'll always be there because life is fragile and uncertain, and everything can change in an instant without warning. Tell the people you love that you love them. Don't wait for the perfect moment because that moment might never come. Say the words now, today, right this second, because tomorrow is never guaranteed, and you never know when you might lose the chance to say what needs to be said, to express how you feel, to let the important people in your life know exactly how much they mean to you and how grateful you are to have them. Live your life fully. Don't waste time on things that don't matter. Don't stress about small problems that won't matter in a year or 5 years or 10 years. Focus on what's truly important, on the relationships and experiences and moments that make life worth living, that bring you joy and meaning and purpose, because when you're lying in the darkness, unable to move or speak, the only things you'll regret are the chances you didn't take, and the love you didn't express, and the life you didn't fully live when you had the opportunity to do so. I know it's a cliche to say that you should live every day like it's your last, but I'm living proof of why that cliche exists. Because I came within minutes of my last day arriving way too soon, way too unexpectedly, without warning or opportunity to say goodbye or do the things I'd been putting off, and if I hadn't been saved by an observant janitor who trusted his instincts, I would have died in that grave, fully conscious, experiencing every moment of suffocation and terror, and my last thoughts would have been regrets about all the things I never said and never did and never experienced, about all the time I wasted worrying about things that didn't matter while neglecting the things that really did. Don't let that be you. Don't wait for a near-death experience to teach you what I'm telling you right now. Life is short and fragile and precious beyond measure, and you need to treat it that way. Starting today, starting right now, starting this very moment before it's too late. Before you find yourself in a situation where you wish you'd appreciated more and loved more and lived more when you had the chance. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something that made you realize how precious life is? Have you ever had a moment where you thought you might lose someone you love, or where you realized you'd been taking something important for granted, something you should have appreciated more but just assumed would always be there? I want you to share your story in the comments below. Tell me about your experience. Tell me what you learned from it. Tell me how it changed you. Because these stories matter. These experiences connect us, and by sharing them we help each other understand and appreciate the gift of life we've all been given. The miracle of being alive and conscious in this moment, on this day, in this world so full of possibilities and beauty and love if we just take the time to notice and appreciate it. This video, this story I've shared with you today, it's not easy for me to talk about. Reliving these memories brings back all the fear and panic and helplessness I felt during those days when I was trapped in my own body, when I was minutes away from being buried alive, when I thought I'd never see my family again, or feel the sun on my face, or experience any of the simple things that make life worth living. But I'm sharing it because I believe it's important, because I believe my experience can help others, can wake people up to what really matters, can inspire you to live more fully and love more deeply and appreciate more consciously every single day you're given, every moment you have, every breath you take. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about your own life, if it reminded you to appreciate what you have and the people you love, then please hit that like button below. Let me know that my story resonated with you, that sharing my trauma and my survival and my message was worth the emotional cost of reliving these painful memories, of opening these wounds that haven't fully healed yet, of being vulnerable and honest about the most terrifying experience of my life. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more real experiences from real people who have survived impossible situations and learned powerful lessons from them, then make sure you subscribe to I Live to Tell, hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, because we're building a community here of people who understand that life is precious and stories matter, and sharing our experiences makes us all stronger and more aware and more grateful for the incredible gift of simply being alive, of being able to move and speak and feel and love and experience everything this beautiful and complicated world has to offer. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for taking the time to understand what I went through and what I learned from it. And remember, every single day is a gift. Every single breath is a miracle. And you are alive right now in this moment, which means you have the opportunity to make today matter, to tell someone you love them, to do something meaningful, to appreciate the simple fact that unlike me in that casket, unlike me in that grave, you can move and speak and interact with the world around you. You can hug the people you love and chase your dreams and create memories and live your life to the fullest. Don't waste that opportunity. Don't take it for granted. Live fully and love deeply and make every moment count. Because you never know when your last moment might come, and you want to make sure that when it does, you have no regrets about the life you lived, and the love you shared and the person you chose to be. You want to be able to look back and know you took every opportunity, that you said every word that needed to be said, that you lived every moment with intention and purpose and gratitude. And that's the lesson I learned from my experience. That's the wisdom I gained from my nightmare. And that's what I want to share with you today. Not just as a story, but as an invitation to live better, to love more, to appreciate more deeply everything you have before it's too late.